Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host tonight, Matt Filipovitz, joined by my phenomenal co-host, Mr. Bill DeFilippo. Bill, is there anything at all you want to talk about?
No, I'm good. You can wrap up this episode whenever you want.
All right, that all sounds good. Similar to the Penn State Boise State game, we will take a business-like approach and get out of here. Not relatively sweat-free.
Yeah, home field. Thanks as always. Subscribe wherever you go. Matt, yeah, go ahead. Tell the people they could to go about their week, I guess.
Bill, that game rocked. That first 8 minutes of that game was kick-ass. Penn State 31, Boise State 14. Penn State gets out to an early 14-0 lead thanks to two of the prettiest passes, I think, of Drew Allar's career. A nice ball to Tyler Warren in the back of the end zone in the red zone, and then a floater over the top on 2nd and 4 to Amari Evans for an explosive touchdown. Got a little bit hairy there in between, Bill, but I think you agree with me. It never really felt like Boise State had a chance to come back. And Nick Singleton, a 58-yard touchdown run to seal the deal and send Penn State to the national semifinals in Miami, Florida next week. Bill, on the rundown for this episode, my first thing was, let's just appreciate where we're at here, because this is truly uncharted territory for us as Penn State fans. You and I specifically, I think, especially. 13 wins sets a program record. This team is one of the 4 remaining teams in college football, and I could not be more excited about it.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a thing that we mentioned on the last episode of the pod, but like the story of the James Franklin era at Penn State has been a story of a program that is the best of that next tier. There's the tier of teams that compete for and win national championships every year. Ohio State,
Alabama.
This has been Alabama, Georgia. This has been pretty fluid over the course of the playoff, but Clemson has been in there. Michigan has been in there. LSU has been in there. Like, there have been a lot of teams in that tier, and Penn State has always been one of the best, consistently the best of the teams that didn't get in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they are now in this spot, people can complain all they want about the level of competition that Penn State played. God bless them, let them do that. I'm going to ignore every single one of them because I do not care in the slightest. What we have wanted for years and years and years is to see Penn State make it to the 4-team playoff. And the route that they took to get there this year was a little different because of the expanded playoff. But we are finally now getting to see the thing that we have wanted to see for Penn State since 2014. And it's a moment for celebration. It's a moment for praise. And once that moment passes, job's not done.
Job is far from done.
Because this is a team that can win a national championship. Like, by definition, if you are at this point, I'm skeptical that they will be able to go on to win a national championship. But by definition, if you are at this point, you have a chance to be a national champion. And yeah, I'm still pinching myself.
It feels insane. I do want to call out, we're recording this right now on New Year's Day night. We do not have any kind of injury updates on Abdul Carter. I think he is a very big part of what Penn State's going to be moving forward. And I'll talk about this, when it comes time to talk about the Penn State defense in this game. But I want to sing the praises of the upperclassmen of that Penn State front seven who went out there and held Ashton Jeanty to his worst game of the season, which is saying something considering he went for 104 yards on 30 carries with a long of 26. It was very funny to me, Bill, though, that his longest run of the game came on like a 3rd and 21 where they ran a draw and they gave it to their best player and it worked.
Did you also Matt and I talked about this last
Evil
night.
Matt.
I know you were yeah, evil Matt. I know you were busy throwing back a couple Shirley Temples during the game, but did you also, when you saw them hand the ball to Jeanty, did you also just like in that moment immediately know that he was going to pick up that
100%.
first
I
down?
mean,
I can't explain it. I cannot explain
I
it.
have really like I forget who I first heard this take from, but somebody made the comment about how the thinking surrounding like those 3rd and long plays are really evolving from like drop 6 or 7 guys in coverage to maybe it's better to bring 5 or 6 and throw a quarterback off its game. When I saw Penn State drop out into coverage there with Abdul Carter not on the field, so the pass rush isn't really going to be there, I figured there was going to be a lane. And it
Oh no.
I have audio. I think I'm back. Sorry about that, folks.
There we go.
Was indeed the case. All right, input is my mic. There we go. Sorry about that. I will not edit that out because we were recording this on New Year's Day. Yeah, Bill, I'm really want to sing the praises though of the upperclassmen of that Penn State front, specifically Amin Vanover and Devon J. Thomas, a 5th-year guy and a 6th-year guy who have been thrust into bigger roles by nature of some attrition at those positions. Watch Amin Vanover go out there and I think play his best game as an Nittany Lion. Watch Devon J. Thomas, a 6th-year guy who has really poured heart and soul into Penn State for over half of a decade, to watch him go out there and have a great game on the day for both of those guys. Amin Vanover, 6 tackles, 5 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. Devon J. Thomas, 4 tackles, 2 solo, 1 tackle for loss. Those 2 guys specifically, I think deserve a ton of praise. And again, we'll get back into it later on when we talk about the Penn State defense. But Bill, I am so happy for these upperclassmen, these guys who were here during the 2020 and 2021 absolutely horrible seasons. To watch them go out there and continue to be able to play together is really, really cool.
I completely agree. And I think that it goes beyond those guys. Smith Vilbert had to play a lot. A big thing that's going to kind of hang over all of our conversation is that Abdul Carter's injury forced Penn State's hand in a lot of ways. And that meant Amin Vanover had to play, I would assume, more than he has played all season. Smith Vilbert, I would assume, played more than he has had to play all season. The night in Sutton in a way, probably. That I would guess that playing 60 snaps is probably up there for his most.
Max Granville got in.
Those 2 guys
specifically on like a 3rd and long.
Max
Granville had a nice wraparound. He came around, tried to get some backside pressure. I think it was on the Wheatley pick.
Yeah, I think I said this somewhere, but like I'm trying really hard to temper my expectations for Max Granville, but I have to a lot of respect for a lot of respect to Penn State's coaching staff for refusing to let me do that. But yeah, Smith Vilbert and Amin Vanover, 2 guys that, due to unfortunate circumstances, had to play more than I assumed they would have ended up playing. You mentioned Devon J. Thomas having to play a ton. Keziah Izzard also had to play a ton.
Another 5th-year guy.
That front, along Penn State's defensive line. Even if you look in the linebacker room, Kobe King, obviously, a guy's been around for a while, but Dom DeLuca and then Tyler Elston played 15, according to the snap counts for the game. Tyler Elston played 15 snaps, which I would assume is his most in quite some time, probably up there for the most of the season. And then the game was iced with the Tyrese Mills pick. So a lot of guys who, for one reason or another, just got passed by other dudes on the depth chart, have never quite climbed up the depth chart, whatever it might be, ended up getting on the field, ended up making huge contributions to Penn State's defense. And the reason that we mentioned all of these guys and not just 1 or 2 of them is because it took a 11 men on every single snap effort to shut down the best running back, arguably the best offensive player in college football. And they ended up doing that in a way that, I think I used this word on Twitter, heroic. Like, it was a heroic effort by Penn State's defense to bottle up Ashton Jeanty and the Boise State running back.
Let's talk about that. Let's dive into the Jeanty of it all. Ashton Jeanty, I think, is a phenomenal running back. Bill, it's so frustrating to watch a guy who should be stopped for 1 yard gains consistently turn them into 4 and 5 yard gains. I think you called this out really well yesterday. The Penn State defense did a phenomenal job limiting Ashton Jeanty. Again, like I said, 30 carries for 104 yards. That's 3.5 yards per attempt. He didn't really do much of anything in the passing game. 3 catches for 22 yards. Dom DeLuca made a great play on him in one-on-one coverage to close out the third quarter, I believe that was, which was awesome to see. Boise State's plan was clear. They wanted to have Jeanty be able to run the football down their throats. The Penn State defense was prepared for it. And then once the offense gave them that 14-point cushion, Boise had to start airing it out a lot more. To Boise's credit, and to Maddox Madsen's credit, Madsen's numbers on the day, 23 for 35 for 304 yards and 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. 2 of them, I think, are who cares interceptions, honestly. Like, the Zion Tracy one game was iced. Tyrese Mills, the game was pretty much iced. And Zakee Wheatley was a forced throw on like 3rd and 1,000,000. I think Maddox Madsen played a pretty decent game overall, considering what he was asked to do. But to watch Penn State's defense be able to control how Boise State had to come back, I thought was very impressive.
Yeah, and I think that the way that they bottled Jeanty up was wild. I mean, you saw from the get-go how much respect Tom Allen and Penn State's defense were paying him, because he was just getting met by guys. There were times where Abdul Carter was not like fully playing linebacker, but he's standing up off the ball so he could attack whatever lane opens up for Ashton Jeanty.
It was important for Abdul Carter, I think, real quick, Bill, to talk about where he lined up. Abdul Carter, when he lines up as an edge rusher, he can really only cover C gap. If you put him in the middle like a linebacker, he can get to A, B, or C, wherever Jeanty's going to be, and he's fast enough to close the gap. I thought that was a really good call by the defensive coaching staff to put him there.
Yeah, and you saw the interior of Penn State's defensive line just consistently collapse the interior of Boise State's offensive line, and those little lanes that Jeanty was so good at finding, taking that extra half second to see where the lane is opening up and getting through there. And I think we saw him do that. We saw him do that to the best of his ability against this Penn State defense. The mix of that and how hard he is to bring down, I thought both of those were on display. It's just a lot of the time with him, when that stuff happens, it leads to an 8-yard gain, a 10-yard gain, a 12, 15, 20-yard gain. And what I thought Penn State's defense did so well was, when he's fighting for those extra couple of yards, he is fighting for a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th yard. He is not fighting for a 12 to 15 yard gain. He's fighting just to get something respectable that keeps them kind of on schedule. And there's going to, I still think he's an unbelievable football player. Like, I thought, as I just mentioned, we saw what he can be, but we also saw how Penn State's defense is able to take that stuff away. And yeah, when they take that away, when you take away the threat of Ashton Jeanty, yes, Maddox Madsen had a productive night, 23 for 35, 304 yards, 8.7 yards per attempt. I think a lot of that, I'll do some quick math here while you're talking, Matt, and just see what that number drops down to if you take that the one long touchdown out of the equation. But so much of their passing game is built on play action. When they took that away, it was a very Penn State playing a team like Minnesota or Penn State in that game against Bowling Green approach, where they're just trying to get the ball out as quickly as possible. They're trying to make sure the pass rush is neutralized. They're trying to take what they can get in the passing game and do that over and over and over and over and over again. And they just they did that to an extent, but it didn't lead to points.
One thing, and I do want to give a hat tip to the Boise offensive coaching staff here. Their 2 touchdowns came basically on the concept that the Penn State defense is going to be obsessed with stopping Ashton Jeanty, and it came with him being more or less a decoy. The fullback dive to Tyler Crow, if you watch that play, Jeanty flares out. They're in an old school, almost I formation coming into the play. Penn State is really going like 8 men in the box, and 3 men flare out with Jeanty to make sure they have him. Clears out some space. Tyler Crow, shout out to a fullback. Always love a fullback. Muscles his way into the end zone. That play where Matt Lauder cuts that very long touchdown, a really well schemed up play action play to Jeanty, where you think you're going to hand the ball off. Lauder stays in the block for a long time, releases late. He's wide open down the sideline. Actually, I want to give a shout out to, weirdly enough, Mike Yursich. Penn State ran that play with Tyler Warren, or a modified version of that play with Tyler Warren against Iowa back in 2023. Go back and watch those highlights. The whiteout, it's pretty much the exact same concept. Warren stays in the block for a long time. He flares wide open. He's pretty much in the exact same spot Matt Lauder was, except for he's in the end zone, and you just drop it in there to Tyler Warren. That's something that's really, I think, a well-designed play. And shout out to Boise, again, for getting their 2 scores by understanding the threat of Ashton Jeanty.
And they, if memory serves, that was almost the exact, running leak, right? That is basically the exact concept that Ohio State scored its 2 touchdowns against Penn State on.
Correct.
One was Emeka Egbuka, the other might have been Carnell Tate, but that was just something that they noticed. That was just something that they were able to identify. And the thing is, you can get that once or twice in a football game before the other team starts noticing it. And they were able to take advantage of that by getting it that one time, like you mentioned, using the threat of Ashton Jeanty and how Penn State's defense was selling out on him, and then getting their big tight end Matt Lauder into a bit of space where, easy pitch and catch for Maddox Madsen at that point.
2 last guys I want to call into the defense, Bill. 2 4th-year players in the program, redshirt juniors. Kobe King, the lack of quitting him to force that fumble on the sideline on Jeanty to get the ball back for Penn State up 14-0 was a very impressive play. Kobe King has been a phenomenal linebacker all year, and it was cool to see him. And Zakee Wheatley's ball skills shine yet again. Wheatley was the Fiesta Bowl defensive player of the game for his performance. He had, like I said, he had the fumble recovery and 1 pick, but he also added in, if I can find him on here, sorry about this, 3 tackles with 2 of them being solo. But again, his knack for the football really shone through. And it was cool to see him have a decent return after that pick. And again, Kobe King and Zakee Wheatley, I think, deserve a lot of praise. Wheatley was a guy I was watching to see how he wrapped up, because I don't think he's the most consistent guy in terms of wrapping up. He likes to go for big hits, and, respect to the kid for trying it. But it was good to see him kind of do the thing he's best known for, and that's getting hands on the football and getting the ball back to the offense.
Yeah. I mean, Zakee Wheatley, one thing that had been missing from this Penn State defense for a lot of the season were those kinds of big momentum turnover swinging type of plays. And Zakee Wheatley's a guy who his reputation has forever been. He is the guy who makes those kinds of plays. He's the guy who's, I think one of his first games that we all remember for Penn State was when Penn State played against Purdue in, that Thursday or Friday night game in 2022. Going into that game, Wheatley had the reputation of being Penn State's turnover king, the guy who always just had a nose for the ball in the summer ball. And I believe in that very first game, he was able to force or recover a fumble.
He forced it against, I think, current UConn receiver now, TJ Sheffield, and then Joey Porter recovered it.
Yeah. So you have a guy like that. You have a guy who you just kind of need someone who is going to make a big play in a game like this. Someone who can kind of keep the tide going in Penn State's direction. He was able to do that. And then, like you mentioned, Kobe King, thumper. He's a guy who is just really good for all the consternation about Penn State struggling to tackle people. That's never really a concern with Kobe
Nope.
King. Whenever he got into the phone booth with anyone, he was able to wrap them up and take them down. He and Jalen Reed both had 8 sacks on the day to lead
8 tackles.
the Nittany Lions. 8. Yes, tackles, not sacks. Apologies. If they had 8 sacks of the day, oh boy, we would have been watching a demolition. But yeah, we saw. I think a lot of the time when you face adversity as a football team, being able to turn to guys who have experience, who have been in battles, who have gotten knocked down to the mat and have to get back up is something that's really, really helpful. We've seen that throughout this. See, it's a thing that I remembered specifically after Reed got knocked out of the game for a second, Matt. Penn State's gone through this season without its second best player on defense in KJ Winston. It went through most of this game without their best player in Abdul Carter. And when you are in those moments where you have to rally from the fact that you do not have your best players, you need to rely on the guys who have been there before and the guys who can lead you and can provide experience, can provide a steady hand. Jalen Reed, Kobe King, Amin Vanover, Denai Denison, Dom DeLuca, Devontae
DDS
Thomas,
was an animal last night too. He was fantastic.
A lot of guys who have played a lot of football for Penn State. They had a very specific game plan and a very specific approach to this game in specifically taking out Ashton Jeanty, and it paid off. Like all of those years worth of reps in practice and in games were crucial on I was going to say Saturday. It wasn't Saturday. They played this game on Tuesday night, and I thought we saw.
Yeah, and again, Denai Dennis Sutton, I think, also had a phenomenal game. Bill, looking at the box score, Jalen Kimber had 6 tackles. I don't really remember him being involved. I'm gonna have to go back and on another rewatch and really take note of where Kimber was, because it's always cool, when you see a cornerback in your top 5 tacklers against a run-heavy team. That means the dude's not afraid to stick his nose in there. So shout out Jalen Kimber as well. I didn't realize that watching live or on my first rewatch. So maybe I'll have to lock in there.
Yeah, I didn't notice that either. It was I remember them calling his name a time or two, but I didn't remember him being that involved in things.
Which is cool. Again, it's cool. I mean, he's another, what is he, 4th-year guy, 5th-year guy? I know he's a transfer in, but
he's played a lot of football at Florida and Louisville. But
Georgia.
Again, like that experience matters. That experience is a really important thing in a game like this.
Bill, the holidays may be in the rearview mirror, but with the run we're on, Penn State has at least one more game coming up, and it could be in beautiful, sunny South Florida. So it might be time for you to add a little something to your wardrobe. And for that, I recommend our friends at Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel makes some of the coolest collegiate apparel in the marketplace today. Crew necks, hoodies, t-shirts, sweatshirts, joggers, hats, and they really take the time to dig through the archives, find old logos, and find ways to connect to your school. And our listeners get 15% off their first order with promo code RLR24. That is still the code as of right now, RLR24. 15% off your first order. I have a ton of stuff from Home Field. Some of the comfiest stuff I can wear. I wore a Penn State Home Field shirt to the bar last night for the game, and I got a couple of compliments on it, which is always cool to see. Again, thank you as always to Home Field for sponsoring this podcast. And Bill, Penn State offense had a really weird day. What do you think?
It had a really interesting day.
It was awesome for a lot of it, and it was really weird in the middle.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that not even necessarily a thought. I think it's pretty inarguable that if Penn State scores after that Boise fumble to go up 21-0, I think at that point, it would have happened late in the first quarter, early in the second quarter. For the most part, it would have been curtains.
If Aller gives that too, he held that way too long on that read, which I get. That's not his forte, but Singleton, he could have still been running right now.
Yeah. Well, probably not. I think he would have stopped to go to bed. But at that point, it seemed like it would have been game over, or it would have been enormously difficult for Boise to get back into that game. But after the fumble, first 2 drives, Drew Aller played as good as I've seen him play. The running game was not like everything was working for Penn State's offense on its first 2 drives. And then after the fumble, 3 plays, 7 yards, and a punt. The next drive, 5 plays, 3 yards, because Aller got sacked a couple of times, and a punt. The drive after that, 7 plays, 16 yards. There were a couple of penalties in there. I think that was the drive that had a pair of penalties by Sal Worley that just killed them, and another punt. And by that point, it's 14-7. Penn State's offense has hit a brick wall. You can just see that even though Boise had a couple of 3 and outs in there, they were just starting to get a little bit of mojo. They were starting to how do I want to say this? Like, feed off of the fact that they weren't taken out of the game, that the game wasn't over and they still had a shot in it. And when that happens, the opposing team could be really dangerous. But thank God, even though there were a few pretty not good drops on Penn State's final drive of the first half,
dude, Aller was dropping it in buckets on that point. Like, NFL scouts are going to see those throws and say, we got guys who can make those plays. Like, no disrespect to the Penn State pass catchers, but they weren't making the plays that Aller was putting out there for them. Amari Evans did have a couple of nice plays, but Aller was dealing in this game.
Yeah, I'm going to look this up momentarily. JD Pickle from On 3 said, if Drew gets some real deal options in the perimeter next year, it could be special. And like, I think we, with respect to the guys who dropped those passes, Trey Wallace has been a really great soldier for Penn State. And then Tyler Warren, who is the best tight end in America, one of the best pass catchers in America. Like, I think that's the thing that a lot of people will agree with. But there was some weird play calling in there. It seemed like Andy Kotelnicki was leaning a little bit too much on the fact that Boise, and we'll talk about this in a second, that Boise's back 7 is a really big weakness for them, and Penn State could take advantage of that. Kind of got away from the running game a bit, but getting that field goal at the end of the first half, going up 2 possessions, and then just buying yourself that little bit of extra cushion to be able to get into a groove on offense, I think was huge.
Aller on the day, 13 for 25, 171 yards, and 3 touchdowns. His pass catchers, of course, only 4 guys caught balls in this game. Tyler Warren, 6 for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. Amari Evans, 2 for 55 yards and 1 touchdown. Preview pod listeners know the Amari Evans anytime touchdown was a lock. Trey Wallace, 3 catches for 37 yards. And then shout out Luke Reynolds, 2 catches for 16 yards, new career high for the kid. And I think he caught the first pass of the game. So shout out to Luke Reynolds. That's cool to see. We could talk enough about the Penn State passing game, Bill, but I think after those first 2 drives, it was kind of, status quo. Like, nothing that I'm like super interested in talking about except for that Amari Evans catch down the sideline. The star of the show and a glaring omission, I think, for a large part of this game plan was the Penn State running game, led by Kaytron.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about Nick Singleton in this game. Nick Singleton had the big highlight play, the big 58-yard touchdown run, I want to say. Singleton on the day, 12 carries for 87 yards and that 1 touchdown. But, Bill, hat tip to Mr. Kaytron Allen. I think his best game, 17 carries, 134 yards, 7.9 yards per carry. He runs mean. He runs aggressive. He hits the hole hard. He bounced the ball outside well when the opportunity came. And I'm so happy for Kaytron Allen, man. He deserves all of the praise I think he's going to get.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think that it was funny because we saw a very Ashton Jeanty performance out of Kaytron Allen.
That's a great way to put it.
He was really patient. He kept waiting for holes to open up. He hit them really hard. He was really hard to take down. Like, everything that makes Jeanty a special running back, we saw out of Kaytron Allen in this game. Like, I wish I was able to look up how many runs he had that were either stuffed at the line of scrimmage or only went for a yard or 2, because it felt like that was happening with Nick Singleton a good amount. Did not feel like that was happening with Kaytron Allen even a little bit. Like, he just was consistently doing what Penn State wants its number 1 running back to do. And it made it so, even though Nick Singleton Wasn't really that explosive for much of the game in the running game. They used him a lot in pass pro, and I didn't think he had an especially good game. In
Dude,
pass
those
pro,
blitzes
it
Boise
made
threw
it
at were
so.
crazy. Credit to
Mhm.
Boise. There's a reason they led the country in sacks
Yeah,
this year. They were really getting after it.
yeah, they were bringing a lot of like pressure right up the middle where um, it was a mix of Nick Dawkins had to see it, Nick Singleton had to pick it up, and if anything goes even a little bit wrong, they're just immediately in Drew's eyesight and kind of getting him off of his game. So like really, still only 4 sacks, which I looked that up. It's tied for the most Drew has been sacked in a game in his Penn State
It
career
felt like
with
more.
the Ohio State game in 2023. Yeah, only 4 sacks. Enough times pressuring him that it ended up being
A problem.
the Penn State's detriment. Yeah, but despite that, Singleton chip, and then when it got late in the game, everyone's a little bit tired. The holes open up a little bit more because you get a little more space to run through them. The arm tackles are a little less effective. He found the hole, he hit the hole, he took off. And you could say one of the interceptions ended up doing this, but for all intents and purposes, Singleton's touchdown with 4:54 left in the game to put Penn State up 31-14 was the dagger. And when you have that, because that's the dynamic we've wanted from Penn State's running game for basically ever since it became the Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen show in 2022. Allen churns and churns and churns. Singleton, he's not someone who's getting tackled for losses of 4 or 5 yards, but he's also doing some churning. But Allen keeps being body blow, body blow, body blow. And then at some point, like a boxer, the other team's hand is just going to drop a little bit. And that's when Nick Singleton throws that right hook, that he throws that knockout punch. We saw, and it's just beautiful when that works.
It's so cool,
Like,
dude.
that is such an aesthetically pleasing way to watch football that the fact that it ended up working out here, could not be happier about it.
Do you want to talk about the play calling? It felt weird.
So, yeah,
They tried to do the Dinkins play. Again,
Yeah.
preview pod listeners know the Dinkins play was always going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if AK got bored, but Andy Kotelnicki, I think, not that he got too cute. He doesn't really get cute. I don't consider what he does getting cute. I think it's how he runs his offense. But I did think it was kind of weird how they handled certain things after that. I think a pretty flawless first couple of drives. I think things got weird. And maybe they want to keep some things, they didn't need to go into their full bag and they were trying to try some stuff out.
I disagree with that.
Okay.
I disagree with that. What I think, and maybe Thomas Frank Carr is going to do one of his extensive film breakdowns and say I'm ridiculous for this. What I think happened is that Boise's back seven is terrible. They kept holding Penn State receivers, committing defensive pass interference because Penn State kept beating them. I think that when you are an offense that prides itself on aggressiveness, on big plays, on taking it to an opposing defense, when you have the athletes on the outside and at tight end to be able to take advantage of the weakness of an opposing team, you want to pedal to the metal and take it to them. And Drew Aller, his final stat line, 13 for 25, 171 yards, 6.8 yards per attempt. I thought that was, I don't want to say unfair to him. A couple of those drops were, there were a couple of drops in there. There were a couple of moments where he got let down by his receivers, a couple of times where he didn't make great throws. But, I'm going to read a tweet by Dan Orlovsky of ESPN. Felt like last night was one of, if not the best games of Aller's career when it came to decision-making in a muddy pocket, ball placement versus tight coverage, confidence hanging in the pocket, playing faster with his eyes on third down. I thought there was a lot of really good stuff in Penn State's passing game. And I think when Aller's, I don't want to necessarily say locked in because I do think the fumble sapped him of a bit of his mojo. But when he's putting the ball in good places, when Penn State's receivers just cannot get covered by the opposing team's secondary with any level of consistency, I'll go through and look up how many pass interferences and holdings got called on Boise's defense. When you have those sorts of structural advantages, I get wanting to keep throwing the ball down the field. And, if Trey Wallace or Tyler Warren hold on to one of those dimes that Drew threw at the end of the first half, I think his numbers look a little
I
bit
think we
different.
talk about that's a
Having
great point,
said
though. I think we talk about the game different too.
Yeah. And having said that, I completely understand and agree with the fact that all of this can feel really maddening when you are consistently getting 5, 7, 9, 10 yards on the ground. So I understand what I think the vision was for Andy Kotelnicki and how he was calling this game. There were just times where they got away from running the ball a little bit too much. I know two specific plays everybody's going to bring up are that like double reverse thing where Drew gets the ball and then he throws it to Warren when they were deep in their own territory, and that didn't work. Like, I didn't love that play in that spot. And then there was like a 3rd and 1 where they went play action and tried getting it to Warren. It wasn't there. He ends up throwing it to Dinkins, incomplete, and they end up punting. I didn't mind doing that. I hated not going for it after.
Yeah,
but for the most
kind of
part,
play you run knowing you're going to go for it on 4th down.
Exactly. So I think they had a decent idea. I just wish they pivoted a little bit. And it's worth mentioning, Drew threw the ball 25 times this game. Allen and Singleton ran the ball 29 times in this game. And there, when you factor in dropbacks for Drew that and either a sack or him running the ball, they called more passing plays than running plays. I still wish they just ran the ball more because of the success that they were able to consistently find on the ground in this game.
You really may have just changed my entire mind about this game by making that point about how you're right. They got it. I want to say 5 or 6 PIs or defensive holdings. Like, they couldn't stop them. And if my grandma had wheels, she'd be a bike. But if those guys make those plays, if Trey Wallace catches that ball, if Tyler Warren catches that ball, we're looking at everything very, very differently. I think that's a really strong point, Bill. And I think maybe I have to be a little bit less critical of Andy Kotelnicki coming out of this game.
No, go ahead. Like, whatever your concern was is probably something that a lot of people who are listening to this pod share. So go ahead.
Part of it was, and I think it's important that we also have this too. Like, I think Penn State made some weird decisions not to go for it on those 3rd and short or 4th and shorts because they were running the ball so efficiently, and it felt like they could really get a lot of push up front. But I guess, again, Aller was dealing, so I kind of respect now that I kind of take a step back and, have a day to really focus on what exactly happened, last night. I do think it's fair to say that AK was probably right to keep on trying to dial up those shot plays, keep those safeties back, and keep, the defense having to be honest so Allen and Singleton had that little bit extra room to run. I think that's some pretty good points.
Yeah.
Offensive line wise.
And I was going to say, I just went and looked. Boise got called for a pair of defensive holding penalties and 1 defensive pass interference.
Okay, it felt like more.
So of their 10 penalties that they committed, 13 penalties, they committed on the day, 3 would have been directly tied to Penn State's passing game for, I think, 25 of the 90 yards that they would have given up in penalties. By the way, penalties.
23 of them?
Just
total?
Well, I just mentioned that for Boise. But for Penn State, this is, I'm more pissed off about this than I am about play calling. 16 penalties for 163 yards in 2 playoff games. That's not acceptable. That is a big problem. Stuff like the denied Dennis Sutton cheap shot on Ashton Jeanty, there is absolutely no place for that. I love the edge that Deny plays with. You cannot do that, if only because of the disadvantage that you then put your team at after such like a big play in the game. This is one of those things that if they commit 7, 10, 12, whatever penalties against Notre Dame or against Georgia in their next game, they are going to lose that football game, and they are probably going to lose that football game emphatically. This has to be one of the number one things that they focus on heading into the Orange Bowl next
Agreed.
week.
They need to clean that up 100%. Offensive line wise, again, I thought they could have been a little bit better picking up the blitz, but they moved guys around in the run game. And when Aller did have time, he had all the time in the world. So I want to make sure, when they were pass blocking well, they were pass blocking incredibly well. And I want to make sure we call that out. Mm-hmm. Bill, anything you want to touch on the offense before we go over to game balls?
Let me look through my notes really quickly. Yeah, I just think it's worth mentioning the fact that there were a lot of times, and Franklin made this point at halftime about penalties and needing to clean that up, and if they do that, they would go on to win. You look at a lot of this game, and I think in a lot of ways, Penn State was its own worst enemy. 5 for 13 on third downs, 6.8 yards per attempt in the passing game. Drew went 13 for 25 throwing the football, the 10 penalties for 98 yards. There were a lot of ways in this game where I don't want to say it felt like Penn State was playing with its food, but it felt like Penn State was the thing getting in Penn State's way. I think the 31-14 scoreline is somewhat reflective of how much better Penn State can be than Boise. But I think that Penn State got in its way too much
Agreed.
on offense and on defense. And it's one of those things that they got away with it against Boise. They got away with an extent to an extent against SMU. But they've gotten away with doing not playing. They were playing a C+, a B- game twice now. They got to play A games from here on out if they want to be national champions, which again, they have a real shot at being national champions.
1-4, baby. 1-4 shot. About as good as you can have right now. Bill, game balls. I'll go first. I have one offense, one defense.
Sure, go ahead.
Miscellaneous one. Offensively, I mean, it's easy to give it to Drew. It's easy to give it to Tyler Warren. It's easy to give it to Kaytron Allen. But I'm going to give it to Amari Evans for catching that deep ball and for making a play down the sideline that, candidly, I didn't know Amari Evans was capable of making. Penn State has been looking for a great third option in the receiving game after Trey Wallace and Tyler Warren, and Amari Evans has been rolling lately, like between the Minnesota game long touchdown, Oregon game long touchdown. Now that we're back in decent weather, the Boise State game long touchdown. Shout out to Amari Evans. He gets the offensive game ball for me. Defensively, I called him out earlier. It's Amin Vanover. Awesome. 5th-year guy. Never really got a chance to start. To watch him go out there and be able to shine after Abdul Carter goes out was cool to see. And then special teams, Colin Dinkins made an awesome tackle on kick coverage, and it is very cool to see a walk-on after, all the Dom DeLuca love we just got last time out here. It's cool to see a walk-on make plays when he gets his opportunity. So shout out to Colin Dinkins.
Yeah, I'm very easily going to go with Kaytron Allen. I think that what he was able to do was provide what's the word I'm looking for? He was able to just kind of provide that safety blanket for Penn State. He was able to provide the net for when they started to fall a little bit in this game. He did exactly what Kaytron Allen needed. Penn State didn't get a ton going in its passing game. Tyler Warren, 6 for 63, obviously had that big completion to Amari Evans, but it's not like Penn State was consistently killing Boise through the air, despite what I just mentioned about what I think their approach was. So they needed at least one of the running backs to have a big game. Nick Singleton, of course, hit the haymaker home run, whatever heavy-handed metaphor you want to make at the end of the game, but Kaytron Allen was the consistent guy down to down doing it for Penn State's offense. I'm going to give it to him. I'm glad you mentioned me and Vanover because he's the guy that I'm going to give it to on the defensive side of the football. I thought that when if you're going to lose Abdul Carter, it's an all hands on deck crisis. And going forward, it is an all hands on deck crisis for Penn State's defense. Amin Vanover got asked to do more than he has ever been asked to do for Penn State's defense. 6 tackles, 5 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. Just had a really good, really solid, and really reliable football game. And I want to make sure he gets the credit that a guy who got dropped into that spot deserved. He had to, for 3 quarters, fill in for one of the 2 to 3 best defensive players in college football, and he did that admirably. And I think Amin Vanover, you cannot say enough good things about the effort they got out of him. And then finally, I'm going to give it to Riley Thompson. I thought that outside of he had that one shankopotamus that went off of the side of his foot. It looked like I couldn't tell if it went off the side of his foot or it got blocked or whatever, but other than that, he hit the ball really, really well. Averaged 47.2 yards per punt, a long of 63 yards. He's been and my hunch is if you asked him, he'll tell you this for no reason other than he's an Aussie, and Aussies tend to be very honest about things. He hasn't hit the ball especially well this season. He hasn't been nearly as good as he was last year. I thought he had one of his best games of the season in a game where the more field that Boise had to cover, the harder to get into the end zone, the harder that their game plan, once Jeanty was taking out of it, was going to be to execute. So credit to Riley Thompson. I thought that he had a really good and really important game.
It's a little bit weird here, Bill, because now we got to end the podcast. But due to the horrible events that happened last night in New Orleans, thoughts go out to everybody down there who's going through just an absolutely terrible, terrible tragedy. The Sugar Bowl is the least of anybody's worries, as it should be. But with that game now being postponed, we will not know Penn State's opponent until after the game on January 2nd, slated for a 4 p.m. Eastern kick. So that's going to be Georgia and Notre Dame. There's been rumors flying around that could shift the Orange Bowl date around, but it's all just speculation at this point. But Bill, I know it's kind of a weird note.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that as of right now, we're recording this on Wednesday night. It's 9:45 on Wednesday night. As of right now, the plan is to play the Sugar Bowl at 4 p.m. on Thursday. I think I saw that like Louisiana's Attorney General said she would prefer it if they pushed it back to Friday. There's a lot up in the air right now. We're not even going to worry about the Sugar Bowl, about Penn State's opponent. There will be time for that next week once we have a little bit more clarity. Obviously, this is very far down the list of priorities right now compared to what people are going through right now in Louisiana. Matt, I would like to try and shift the vibe to talking about something else to end this podcast. Not ending on such a sour note. Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, Oregon. Which one do you want to start?
I love Texas, Arizona State. That was awesome. I was eating spanakopita. I was eating a lot of very delicious dips with some buddies. It was great. I had a great time. And dude, 4th and 21. Bill, I talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
You know how many they rushed? They rushed 3 and they dropped 8. You don't have the bodies to handle it. You don't have the athletes on Arizona State yet to compete. I think you should have rushed more. And I think we're talking about
they did. They brought they blitzed on that. And what happened was they blitzed 6 or 7 guys on that. And what happened was Texas's offensive line just picked it up. Like that was as good of a blitz pickup as I've ever seen by an opposing team. Like you can go and find a highlight of this. Arizona State tried to get to Quinn Ewers. They tried to throw him off of his game, and Texas offensive line just said, no, this isn't going to happen. And then even then it took an Arizona State safety messing up for Texas to have been able to get a touchdown.
They brought 5. You're right. The last guy dropped out. Oh, well.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, listen, good for Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, it is a testament to Texas's offensive line that you thought they didn't bring pressure, because you are only thinking that because they picked that up.
They really did. They really did. Again, Cam Scattaboo, Kenny Dillingham. That's just a cool story. Like, it's always cool when these unexpected stories can pop up in college football. To watch the fight they had after being awful in the red zone, it was cool. Like, Kenny Dillingham seems like the kind of guy I'd want to play for.
Scatabo looked like he was going to get like fluids intravenously during the game. Like,
he did not
was
look
just dead. He had 38 touches the ball on offense, 143 rushing yards, 99 receiving yards. And I think the important thing with this game, above everything else, stems from what happened in the game after this, because and you know what happened with the Penn State game last night. Every single person will not shut their goddamn mouths about how unfair this system is, because, how can, like, it's unfair to Oregon that they had to play Ohio State. What we like about college, that happens sometimes.
The sport isn't fair.
Yeah. Not only is the sport not fair, we nearly saw Arizona State knock off Texas. We saw Boise give Penn State a ton of trouble until they pulled, until they pulled away a little bit. The scoreline wasn't quite as reflective of how the game ended up going. Like, we are in this weird spot in college football where we are in this weird half-assed trying to make everybody happy, 12-team playoff, where there have always been obvious flaws with this system. And I want to thank Texas and Arizona State for showing us that stuff doesn't always matter. Like, the way this is unfair, the thing they complain about, whatever it be, doesn't always matter, because sometimes you spot the ball and you get a really good football game. Other times you don't. But Texas and Arizona State threw everything that they had at one another and gave us an excellent football. And I just want to say thank you for this, because I am slowly losing my mind watching how, like, people are talking about the Ohio State Oregon.
Former Penn State wide receiver Malik McLean with a touchdown catch in that game. So shout out to Malik. Bill, Oregon, Ohio State.
And it's also worth mentioning, Texas was up 17-3 at halftime. Arizona State, the way they bottled up Texas's running game doesn't bode especially well for Texas going into its next bowl game against Ohio State. Quinn Ewers, I'm not particularly high on him, but when you have receiving options as good as Matthew Golden and Gunnar Helm, that certainly helps. Arizona State, again, all credit for them for fighting and getting back in that and scratching and clawing and making that a really competitive football game. We're right on the doorstep. It was just an awesome game. It was a great college football game, which unfortunately Oregon was not able to give us a second great college football game today.
If Penn State wins a national championship or gets the chance to play for a national championship, I hope they meet Ohio State in the end. If Penn State if Penn State is going to win a national title, I want them to exercise that gigantic demon. I want that to be the opponent at the end of the road, who, if Penn State is going to get to Camelot, they have to slay that dragon. I really want it. I feel like they're going to get it. I feel like Ohio State's going to uphold their end of that bargain the way they're playing right now. Jeremiah Smith is special. Kid is special. That running defense is special. They're playing their best football right now. Ohio State was always going to be the best team, most talented team in the country all season long with that roster. Bill, I hope that we get the opportunity to have Penn State, Ohio State play for a national title. Because if Penn State's going to get the top of the mountain, man, I hope they slay their biggest demon on the way up. I really think that'll be cool. Ohio State's an absolute juggernaut right now.
Yeah, I mean, the way that it looked like Oregon, and this is the one critique that I completely agree with, and it's why I'm in favor of going to an expanded playoff, because I just don't know how, when you're at a 12-team playoff, you can get around this. I want it to be 16 teams, because I really do think when you don't play football for 3.5, 4 weeks, and another team has played a football game going into that game, you just are not going to be able to be your best self from the very beginning. And we did see that in all 3 games. We did see that with Boise. We did see that with Arizona State. We did see that with Oregon. And I thought that Oregon, they looked a little bit better in the second half, but Ohio State's defense just took it to them. They could not run the football at all. They ran the ball 28 times for negative 23 yards. Their top running back, Jordan James, ended up having to leave the game with an injury, 7 carries for 14 yards. He was replaced by Noah Whittington, who had 6 carries for 3 yards. A little bit of success in the passing game, but the way that Ohio State was able to bottle up the running game was ridiculous. Caleb Downs it sucks that Ohio State's going to have the 2 best players in the country next year between Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. And then on the offensive side of the football,
Ryan Barker slander from Bill DeFilippo.
Ryan Barker, I love you. Some guys are just built different. And Jeremiah Smith, if he went to the NFL draft tomorrow, I think he'd be
he'd be the best wide receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers right now.
He would be the best wide receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. He is an unbelievable football player. You saw Oregon thought they could cover him one-on-one, and Ohio State was happy to take advantage of that. The big thing for me from this game, Ohio State has a big-time patchwork offensive line. I think that Oregon's last 2 games have shown that maybe their front 7 is a little overrated between Penn State and Ohio State. But Ohio State, we're now 2 games into them having to replace I believe their left tackle and their center, and they've just been mashing. They push Tennessee around, they push Oregon around, and now they're at a point where I don't know how you can see what has happened. Maybe Georgia comes out and beats Notre Dame by 50 points, and that changes things a little bit. I don't know how you can say anything other than Ohio State is the overwhelming favorite to be named national champions.
Agreed. 100% agree. Man, what a time. What a time, Bill. 13 wins. The opportunity to take down 2 national brands in some iconic games, I think, coming up here in the Orange Bowl. First Orange Bowl since 06, Bill.
Yeah.
I don't remember Penn State ever really playing an Orange Bowl, so that'll be fun. Bill, anything else you want to touch on?
That was the 06 game was the Paterno versus Bowden game. So it was it was a really big game for Penn State. Yeah, I'm going to be 100% honest with all of you. I'm probably, regardless of who it ends up being, not going to pick Penn State to win the next game because I'm really that worried about what they look like without Abdul Carter. But having said that, when this team brings if this team can find its A game, even without Abdul Carter, they can beat any of the remaining.
Who we don't know is out
teams
yet.
in the
We don't know.
We don't know is that we don't. I will say I am not a doctor. I have no inside information here. It looked to me like he would have he messed his shoulder up. He dislocated it. They were, you saw how he fell right on his shoulder. They were doing some work on his upper arm when he was standing on the sideline at the end of the first half. When you watched him, whenever he got on camera in the second half, you could see that he was not trying to pick his left arm up at all. Everything about that looked to me like a dislocated shoulder. My assumption is that they popped it back into place. They're going to do what they can to try and get him to a place where he can play. I wouldn't be shocked if he tries to give it a go on Thursday next week. I don't know how effective he is going to be because I'm pretty sure dislocated shoulder is one of those ones where you can't make it worse, and it's all about injury management.
Pain management.
But regardless, pain management. Apologies. But regardless, like it's going. This part of the schedule, when you get to this point, it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. Losing Abdul Carter makes it even more difficult, but we're at the point of the season where everything is supposed to be difficult. And if Penn State can find its A or even A+ game, they can get past these next challenges. That's just the big thing hanging over them as we head into this next game.
Bill, that's all I got. Today is Wednesday, so I'm going to make sure I word this properly. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we send the folks off into the rest of their week and their weekend?
No, nothing off the top of my head. Just we'll be back sometime next week to prepare for the Orange Bowl between Penn State and either Georgia or Notre Dame.
It should be a fun one, no matter who it is. It should be some very exciting football. Again, final score, Penn State 31, Boise State 14. Nittany Lions move to 8-0 all-time in the Fiesta Bowl. And the Nittany Lions now move into a week off from school with classes being out for winter break to hopefully a very productive prep week for wherever they play. Penn State basketball back on the hardwood tonight when this episode comes out to face Northwestern for the re-picking up, of Big Ten play. 11-2 right now for Penn State hoops on the season. Shout out to those guys as always. If you liked what you heard, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. No, like the video on YouTube. That's what you do. And jump in the comments, talk about the Penn State football team with other Penn State fans. Be sure to follow us on Twitter over at RLR Blog. We are also very active on Blue Sky, where we are at roarlionsroar.com. Thank you, as always, to Home Field for sponsoring this podcast. Again, the promo code is RLR24 for 15% off your first order. For my co-host, Bill DeFilippo, I'm Matt Flipovitz. Take care, everyone, and go State.